Hi, I'm Sarah Perks, an interdisciplinary curator and professor of curating at Mima School of Art and Design in Middlesbrough. This piece is called The Space of Access and asked to consider the effects of the global pandemic in terms of online curation, engagement, and exhibition for contemporary visual art. The first lockdown in March 2020 felt like a tsunami of activity cascaded from galleries and museums. However, it's hard to distinguish quality amongst the vast amounts of cultural content thrown online. An online exhibition could be a bunch of photographs or a comprehensive interactive experience. Exhibitions, talks, readings, films, events, whole learning programs found themselves online. The ICA, London's Institute of Contemporary Art, provided daily update emails, a curatorial mission in itself to guide you through spending your time wisely in the only portal available to an imprisoned art world. The team curated and offered guest curation slots to an amazing world of activity out there in URL. They did a really fantastic job of signposting interest in activity, though it's not true that everyone was bowled over by this service either. In June 2020's Art Monthly, Morgan Quaintance wrote about the streams of unrelenting institutional content, and he reviews this link and list approach. He states, behind the keystrokes of every paragraph and hyperlinked daily list lies the wearying institutional edict to remain productive, to keep selecting, interpreting, filtering, curating. It is exhaustive and unnecessary work. This article and others spelt out the curatorial control issues of simply putting stuff online, part of which is down to, he explains, the subconscious application of a theoretical model of reception that is not fit for purpose. I found it painfully hard to highlight my favorite online exhibitions, and I visited many. But were there any I felt I had really visited? Personally, I favor a short documentary style with the curator and artist in the gallery, as long as sound and vision are of a decent quality. This content was often put out on YouTube anyway prior to the pandemic, of course. I like the new museums in New York ones, for example. But what if the exhibition was only created online in the first place? So whilst it's not new to show exhibitions online, we have this pandemic-induced moment where a lot of museums and galleries migrate to online content, with activity expanding quickly, actively encouraged by the government and funding bodies as physical spaces have to close. Despite this tragedy, there's also a massive celebratory feeling that this somehow provides greater and free access. Now, the great unwashed in the peripheral north can visit one of the many major centre London galleries from their living room. For example, headlines and organizations beamed about what this access could do in terms of reaching new audiences. Let's put aside questions of whether all of these exhibitions, collections, and presentations in the physical space were actually of any interest to whole swathes of communities. That's for another provocation. And instead, let's look at the assumptions behind these particular stories. The digital divide. The biggest assumption is obviously that everyone has some kind of constant broadband, big laptops, spare rooms for offices. We get this. And there's lots of work in academia and industry, lots of reports that consider exclusion as based on access to an internet connection and device. And the pandemic has revitalized the attempt to close this divide through government. There was a DCMS committee on digital exclusion on the 15th of May, 2020. Personally, I thought previous political proposals to have free broadband sounded like the best idea ever. If you didn't, perhaps it's because you already had lots of data and broadband. Okay, let's imagine you have the data and the device and the ability to follow a hyperlink. What happens when you actually get there? Surely one thing visiting an exhibition online has in common with visiting one in a physical space is that you need some prior knowledge and experience to understand it. There's many reports on how intimidating the front of big galleries and museums can be, whether they are shiny new glass or old school Victorian grandeur. Now, I'm not saying that certain groups of people need handholding or a specific paternalistic type of education in order to understand and appreciate them. What I am saying is, if you presume putting exhibitions and collections online makes them more accessible to a far greater demographic, you are wrong. You've already gone too far by forgetting the experience, whether physical or digital, is a construction that does not by its nature invite participation or any kind of active or passive viewing. This is an assumption usually, but by no means exclusively, made by the middle class. It might also be middle of the road in terms of artists, but that depends more on your curatorial strategy. Do I want to see any more Grayson Perry? Not really. There's a whole load more artists out there, some on your doorstep, some in the Amazon rainforest. Go find them. Prior to the pandemic, Arts Council England and Nesta had revealed that spending on digital R&D by cultural organisations was reduced. This is a digital culture survey in 2017. Plus, the government's own Taking Part data evidences that digital culture is reaching the same audiences as physical. This is information we already have. So I'm frustrated when I read the following DCMS headline. Across the UK, arts organisations, museums and theatres are unveiling innovative digital plans to ensure culture and creativity is accessible for all. This is late March 2020. This PR was issued with no further mention of inclusion, despite using the term all throughout. Crucially, many larger organisations now see their online role as UK-wide, i.e. for all, and are using public funding to support this expansion beyond their traditional and geographical audiences. But the evidence suggests they won't achieve this. How can existing theories and practice on inclusion be urgently adapted for this new online and digital space? I think we have to continue many strands of practice that have developed around inclusion, visual art projects that have focused on barriers to physical access for socioeconomic reasons, for disabled communities and people of colour, for LGBTQ+, and all of the intersections of these. Also for neurodiversity, for those with mental health issues. How can they be properly adapted to the digital space? I haven't got an easy answer because this work is not easy. When an exhibition is being prepared physically, most organisations have full-on procedures. They have access audits. Can a wheelchair fit through this space? All aspects of health and safety. Does this flashing light cause problems? Is it suitable for children? And then there's a whole discursive programme around the exhibition, tours, education events, etc., etc. How do you do all this for an online exhibition? We need to rewrite the toolkit. Now, really obviously, this pandemic didn't invent the internet. Over the last 10 years, research in cultural and human geography have been transformed by the digital turn, a new way of investigating traditional concerns of this discipline across globalization, social and spatial networks. In particular, close attention has been paid to how contemporary life is increasingly mediated through digital interfaces, websites, and apps, and the notion of digital frictions that are produced by this. Very briefly, we need to explore the digital interface between body and subject in whole other ways when working online only. There's a ton of work already done on digital curation itself, and it's time to properly explore those. For example, Rhizome in New York has been banging on about this for years, and there's already lots of UK research that has interrogated audience experience and creative engagement, aesthetic encounters, and interdisciplinary art collaborations. A timely publication co-edited by my colleague, Dr. Paul Stewart, in the online journal on Curating, conducted interviews, commissioned artworks, and included a historical perspective. Check it out. The knowledge gap needed now, across theory and practice, is around how contemporary visual art understands social exclusion within the digital space itself, and how that activity can become more inclusive. The social model of disability's core tenets of environmental, attitudinal, and organizational are built around barriers to attending physical spaces and they need to be adapted more widely to apply to online spaces. We need to ask why the government-commissioned report, Culture is Digital, in 2018 concludes that rather than helping increase the diversity of audiences, online access seems to reproduce, if not enlarge, existing inequalities. Last year, I was creating an online art school for mental health and social care organization Turning Point when the pandemic started. So of course it looked like I had done it as a response. It was not a response to this pandemic, but it was a response to engaging people outside of physical spaces and exploring access for well-being. Last June, myself and a group of artists with specialisms in learning and participation attempted to create an online art school with inclusivity at its heart. I couldn't find great examples when researching. I actually failed one of MoMA's contemporary art courses online. I suspect I got the wrong answers because I knew the artists personally, and I knew they saw their work differently to MoMA's interpretations. Either way, it didn't make me feel good. To launch the school, we struggled to adapt to online, and we learned a lot. You can judge the results for yourself on YouTube. For another project that I'm part of, this time about nature recovery, my interdisciplinary team found that creative workshops using eco-psychology and methodologies inspired by Indigenous knowledge translated surprisingly well online. I'm finding that my expertise in relational curatorial strategy can be utilized for creative action online, and that impact can reach far beyond what happens in the white cube. I'm not claiming this is new, but I'm thinking in a different way now as a curator about how to adapt practices specifically across physical and digital spaces, and importantly, with equal respect to both. This is only the start, of course, because we even need to go a level beyond this. Things are becoming more hybrid than ever. And as curators, we have to constantly be on guard that events don't overtake us elsewhere. For curators, the initial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has largely fallen into two areas: that of the survival of organizations and creative practitioners, and that of the urgency to take public engagement online, initially targeted at retaining existing audiences. There has been governmental and other forms of support for the former. For the latter, digital development will be a major factor in the resilience and the sustainability of the sector going forward, particularly as physical access has continued to be restricted. And remember, for some people, it was always restricted in the first place. The COVID-19 crisis has impacted by accelerating rapidly our consideration and our use of digital means. And this work needs to be urgently developed with inclusion as a key driver if we are to meet, for example, Arts Council England's new 10-year strategy, Let's Create. And interestingly, last year, the Arts Council updated their guidelines for the reopening of their project grants in July 2020 to include a focus on engaging people through digital means and an emphasis on activity that closely aligns with our equality objectives. It's tough times, and we should encourage experimentation. The opportunity for amazing curatorial and collection projects with 5G is just beginning. Am I going to be able to experience artwork from collections around the world in a whole other way through the Internet of Things? Whilst experimenting, there's also a duty of care from curators and institutions to ensure that they embed access across protected categories and beyond, and rethink the nature and depth of engagement when working online. The field of curation is moving at a pace. When I say I'm a curator that works with people before objects, it now makes sense to most. The online space offers a way to circumnavigate national borders, smash down barriers, and rethink exhibitions and collections for a new future where repatriation of objects and inclusivity of experience is foregrounded. How do we truly reconceive who creates, who presents, and who engages with visual art using this boundary-breaking technology that is evolving? And what an amazing challenge to have. Good luck.